Hi, this is Daria Shabbat with CorporateProfile.com. I'm here with Michael Norman, Chief Economist of John Thomas Financial. Michael, I want to talk about the financial world a little bit. We have JP Morgan with a $2 billion loss that has then been adjusted to a $9 billion loss.
And rising, maybe.
And rising, I would not be surprised.
Right.
And then we have, most recently, Barclays coming out with the LIBOR interest rate manipulation. And right at the forefront of the pack, we have Goldman Sachs, the blood-sucking vampire squid.
Right.
What in the world?
Well-deserved
term.
Yes.
What is going on? What in the world is going on in the financial world?
Well, that's a very good question. But the financial world over the last 20 or 30 years has gravitated towards a kind of predator financial capitalism. And what I mean by that is it no longer serves as an intermediary between the real economy and capital allocation. It's really become a gigantic casino where the firms, the large firms, as you mentioned, the Goldman Sachs, the JP Morgans, the Barclays, the Citigroups, they're really engaged in speculative activity for their own behalf, for their own accounts. And they frequently act against the interests, I think, of the greater economy and the greater good, if you will.
And their clients,
And
right?
their clients, exactly. I mean, we had that shocking op-ed piece several months ago in the New York Times where one of the Greg Smith, he left and he wrote this letter about how the firm's culture has completely changed. They called the clients Muppets. They often, trade against.
It's a derogatory form of calling clients.
Yes, so it was really shocking. And then recently they had sort of a Jerry Maguire type letter circulating at Goldman, where some of the employees there was just introspectively thinking, well, maybe we have to change our ways. But I hardly think that's going to happen. I mean, it's been too profitable for them. The problem is it's been very, very detrimental, I think, to the global economy. We've had, in the last 10 years or so, we've seen corporate profits as a percent of GDP rise to the highest level ever, and 40% of all corporate profits went to the financial sector. Yet at the same time, we saw we had the housing crisis. We still have high unemployment. So what we're seeing is actually that the activity of Wall Street, as it's constituted now with the big firms, is really like a giant tax on the economy. I mean, it removes enormous amounts of money in the form of transaction fees, and there's really nothing to show for it. It's really more trouble than it's worth because it's created so much instability, right? We had the financial crash, which none of them foresaw, right? And we've had this now somewhat of a rebound, which is still very, very weak, yet those firms are nailing down record profits, and we still see the record bonuses, largely because we also bailed out the financial sector.
It was our tax money, wasn't it?
It was our tax money, exactly. We have this idea in this country, and I think it's a false idea, but we believe that we need to have this vast, enormous financial sector in order to be a great nation. And historically, that just has not been true. And if you look at countries around the world now with very high standards of living, countries like Canada or Sweden, Denmark, places like this where they have Germany, right, where they have very high income per capita, they have a high standard of living, their life expectancy is even longer than here in the United States. I mean, you're looking at countries with maybe 3, 4, 5 banks. That's it. And you don't have this unwieldy mechanism, this huge financial sector which is extracting so much wealth from the real economy. It's really more trouble than it's worth. I went to a talk recently where former Fed Chairman Paul Volcker was there, and he talked about this exact thing. He talked about 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, back in the 1960s, maybe early 1970s, and he specifically was talking about the housing collapse. We built 2.6 million homes in this country with a population of 200 million people. In 2006, with a population of 300 million people, we built 2.6 million homes, the same thing, even though we grew by 100 million in population. But what was different back then in the early 70s, banks originated the loan, they serviced the loan, you went into your banker, you got the mortgage, they held on to it. Now we've seen this growth in intermediation, these firms like Wall Street firms coming in, packaging up these securities, not even knowing the risk level of these securities. And what was the benefit? Nothing. We didn't create any more homes. We didn't build anything new. There was no added value to the economy whatsoever. But what we did get was an enormous amount of volatility and instability. And the interesting thing is, after the crash, you would have thought that our lawmakers and regulators would wake up to this fact and that we'd start to see movement in a different direction. But no, the same entrenched interest, any attempts to try to regulate, the industry have been watered down. Dodd-Frank completely watered down. A lot of the teeth of that proposal have been taken out. So we're just hurtling down the same path, and it's a destructive path. It's one which, suggests a lot more volatility, a lot more instability.
Do you think the reason for all this is because the financial world and the political world is just too intertwined at this point?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at every high-level post in Washington, or every, maybe sub-cabinet level post, there's a Goldman Sachs guy in there. I mean, you literally have the fox regulating the hen house, right? I mean, it's just not going to work under those conditions. And I think it's because Wall Street historically has given so much money to political candidates that they virtually bought the system now. They own the system. Look, I've been on Wall Street for a long time. I've been here over 30 years. I can remember the day when, this industry acted in the interest of the general economy. We would raise capital for small firms. You'd see innovation as a result of the efforts that we undertook. Individual investors were happy to get involved in the stock market, but now they just feel that the game is rigged and they're not going to want to do it. And that's a detriment to everybody in the society. And unfortunately, I don't see that changing in any way. It needs to change. It absolutely needs to change.
What, in your opinion, could be the ways towards change?
Well, for one thing, I think we have to have strict, what I call narrow banking, okay? You can't allow banks to engage in all this very speculative activity. Banks, when you think about them, actually, they're agents of the government. I mean, they have their deposits are guaranteed by taxpayers, right? They have access to the Fed. So, I mean, when you see a bank like J.P. Morgan losing $9 or $10 billion and their chairman says, oh, it's no big deal, it's our money. Well, it's not his money. I hate to say this to Jamie Dimon. I mean, if J.P. Morgan didn't have the guarantee from the government for its deposits, it would be a fraction of its size. So it's not his money that he's playing with. So you have to kind of shrink the, narrow the banking activity, get it back to its traditional, what it traditionally has done, which is lending. And I think firms that are not commercial banks, who are investment banks, let's say the Goldmans, right? If they go under, they have to be allowed to fail. I mean, there can be no safety net for these firms. If they want to speculate with their own money or the money of shareholders, that's fine. But if they fail, they have to be allowed to fail completely. And the other thing is, I would absolutely restrict the ability of large financial institutions to engage in speculative activity in strategic materials and things that we need, food, fuel, right? There's no reason why they should be gambling on the price of fuel and contributing to price increases in things like gasoline and food. There's no reason for that. If they're afraid of currency risk, for example, when they say, oh, the Fed is printing too much money, there's a $4 trillion a day foreign exchange market out there where they fully are capable of hedging. So we should restrict that activity. And I think, if we were to put these rules in place, and if we were to narrow the activities that banks were allowed to engage in, I think we would start to see a much healthier economic environment. I mean, loans as a percentage of GDP have not been growing very much, but the speculative activity of the banks has been exploding, and that's not a good thing.
Let's talk for 1 second about the LIBOR manipulation that's going on with Barclays right now. Bob Diamond came out with an allegation that it was a Bank of England official who apparently gave them a sort of a green or a light green light to manipulate the interest rate. Otherwise, they would nationalize Barclays or something. There was some, fear of that. How is that possible?
Well, because it's like an onion. You peel away one layer, and suddenly there's another layer right beneath it. And I'm not surprised, and I'll tell you why. When we had the AIG disaster, you saw Timothy Geithner, who's currently the Treasury Secretary, who was the head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, very intimately involved in getting money basically to help bail out Goldman, which had bad positions, with AIG being its counterparty. So we saw it at the top branch of the Federal Reserve here, the one that sets monetary policy, the Federal Reserve branch in New York. So it's endemic. LIBOR, to me, is crazy. I mean, why do we allow our loans in this, 95% of all loans originated, your mortgage, if you have one, is priced to LIBOR. I mean, we should be pricing loans to the Fed funds rate. That's the rate the Fed controls. Why do we allow loans to get priced by some clubby group of London bankers? It's ridiculous to me that we even have this structure. That should be eliminated. All loans should be priced to Fed funds because we know the Fed controls the Fed funds rate. We should eliminate this LIBOR risk. But as far as the manipulation, as far as the allegation that the Bank of England was somehow involved, maybe an individual, I'm not surprised because you saw similar types of shady, relationships going on when we had the AIG situation, when Tim Geithner was in there as well. Bad stuff.
Scary, scary.
Yes.
Thank you, Michael, for talking to us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I'm Daria Shabbat with CorporateProfile.com. I just spoke to Michael Norman, Chief Economist at John Thomas Financial. Thank you for watching, and please tune in again for more interesting interviews and hot financial news.